the hellscape of monsters, demons are often portrayed as the most nefarious of them all, and rarely do you ever get to play as one in a video game. Then along came Demon Turf, an indie platformer developed by Beebz and published by Platonic Friends. I came across this one by pure chance. I was just browsing Steam one day and then BAM! It hit me like a ton of bricks. I think what drew my attention the most was its aesthetic. It was very Doom-like in its flawless marriage of two-dimensional characters and three-dimensional environments. Hell, both games even have demons in them. Only unlike Doom, Demon Turf is a third-person platformer about a little girl on a quest to attain power. Do you think the Doomslayer would kill Beebz? Anyway, there have been no shortage of stellar indie platformers these past few years, and with games like Tower Princess and Lil Gator on the horizon, the figurative train shows no signs of slowing. I mean it when I say that I'd been highly anticipating this one since playing its excellent demo a while ago, and now that it's finally here and I've successfully completed it 100%, I have quite a few things to say. In Demon Turf, you are Beebz, a very childlike demon of 1,000 years. After being taunted in her sleep by none other than the Demon King himself, she decides to set out and conquer the 4 Demon Turfs with the main goal of usurping the throne. It's along the way she gets by with a little help from her friends Midgie and Lucy and takes over the respective areas, gaining incredible powers along the way. Demon Turf is a very unique kind of 3D platformer, being that it's all about the movement. Sure, it's got different qualities sprinkled throughout, be it collectathon or puzzle solving, but the overarching focus is undeniably placed on how you, the player, get from the start of a level to the finish. Beebz' movement alone encapsulates this. It's got the usual platform trappings like single jumps, double jumps, and triple jumps, but is also complemented with backflips, wall jumps, and even the elusive super jump, which propels you through the air. Admittedly, there is a bit of a learning curve, what with you having to acclimate to controlling a two-dimensional sprite within a three-dimensional space, but when you finally master what you're given and become one with the game, it's as smooth as butter. This is a speedrunner's playground through and through, with so many moves that can be flawlessly chained together to create this non-stop experience that allows you to rocket through levels without missing a single beat. The primary means of attack is punching. You can either spam it to throw a barrage of small blows, or charge it for an extra bit of oomph with increased knockback and bullet reflecting capabilities. I love that it's a huge palm strike too. It's like if Rayman's fists were fused with Raz's Psy Punch. So cool. The combat is based largely around momentum, as hitting enemies only ever causes them to pinball around. To truly get rid of them, you've got to either knock them into red objects like spikes or send them falling to their doom. Pair this with jumping on their heads or spinning into them for a quick stun, and getting the job done is a piece of cake. That said, it can feel like a bit of a drag, what with you having to dispatch them in the same way every time. It's possible to experiment with different powers, sure, but when it all comes down to it, the only way to get through these is by ending things one of two ways. It's entirely functional, but boy can it feel repetitive. Speaking of the powers, they're all pretty awesome and serve to add even further depth to the gameplay. Such turf abilities include, but are not limited to, a hookshot that lets you grab and swing from stuff, rollout which travels at fast speeds and goes up slippery surfaces, a glide which I hope is self-explanatory, and finally timeout which acts as a bubble that slows down enemies and other sorts of hazards. Mastering these is as important as the movement itself. There are quite a few moments where you have to transition from a rollout to a series of hookshot jumps before capping it all off with a gliding segment. And you'd best believe me when I say hitting them all in quick succession without making any mistakes feels incredible. The timeout can be a pain in the ass though. Its effects are based largely around how long you charge it up beforehand, and since it's most often used during platforming segments, you have to be really precise to get the desired area of effect. A full charge is no issue. It's when you haven't waited long enough that the annoyance begins, causing moving platforms to either bunch up with one another or just not be affected at all. You can also purchase mods for the turf abilities, as well as the basic moves themselves. An extra flutter when jumping, quicker movement, harder hitting punches, you name it. But how do you buy them? Well, that's where the game's MacGuffins come into play. See, every level has its base collectible in the form of batteries, which Beebz must gather in order to gain access to the Demon King's lair. However, there are also secondary goodies like cakes and sweets, which are sprinkled here and there and require a bit of exploration to be found. Of course, you can just click the left stick to be pointed towards them, but that's entirely up to you. It's with these you can purchase the aforementioned mods, as well as aesthetic stuff like different dyes for hair and clothing, and even pets. Might I also say that this game is a bit daunting with its completion requirements? I mean, we've got soccer challenges, photo hunts, arena battles, hell, even bonus trials and arcade stages, which were among my favorites as a good chunk of them were these beautiful recreations of Super Mario 64 levels. All I'm saying is, never before has it been so easy for me to squash TikTok clock, and it's only because of this game I can think about that level without having a conniption fit. This is also where the sweets come into play, as aside from completing optional challenges, they can only be collected on return trips to levels, which at first sounds like lazy recycling until you realize the major changes that have taken place, most of which hold a greater focus on getting you acquainted with your turf abilities. For instance, Turf 3 is home to a subway surfing level where you have to hop from train to train, and the return trip instead sees you exploring a rail yard as you fight enemies and collect keys. Tropical beaches become volcanic islands, deserts are filled with sandstorms, etc. It's these changes that allow the second level runs to feel like legitimately new experiences, which is great since it would have been all too easy for them to come off as cheap rehashes. One of the most interesting things about Demon Turf is that, for the most part, it essentially encourages you to move at your own pace by means of checkpoints that can be thrown down almost anywhere. It's with these you can create safety net warp locations that are good for quick traversal around levels, provided you've already placed them beforehand. Though you've got to be mindful with your placements, because unless you purchase and equip a specific mod, you're limited to only 3. They also come in very handy during the optional trophy races, which are pretty much time trials that pit you against other players courtesy of a built-in leaderboard. It's here proficiency towards the movement is the most important, as clever platforming and creative thinking can actually allow you to bypass certain sections, and in turn reward you with lower times than otherwise possible. Even still, you can complete these with relative ease even if you don't do any crazy moves, since the time thresholds are relatively generous. But there's no denying that the people at the top of the charts really know what they're doing. Just look at this. It's insane. On the surface, it's easy enough for anyone to have an enjoyable time exploring and collecting stuff within levels, but those who dare to delve deeper into the mechanics are sure to be more than satisfied with what the game has to offer. Like I said before, my only real gripes have to do with the shallow combat and unreliable nature of the timeout. But I also wasn't a big fan of the larger levels. They're just a bit too open-ended despite making use of arrows to guide you along the way, and I think the reason for that may be due to their reliance on easily missable sub-areas like the interiors of buildings, but I can't be sure. It isn't a deal breaker, but it can leave you confused for a good while. Now it's time to talk aesthetics, because as you can tell, this game looks incredible. It's kind of like if the visual style of Paper Mario was integrated into the environments found in 3D Mario. Each and every sprite looks to be hand-drawn, and the almost strange mixture of choppiness and fluidity within Beebz' frame animations looks great. I love that when you do a flutter jump, she turns into a bat, or that spinning turns her into a tornado of sorts. Can't forget that going underwater morphs her into a submarine fish thing. There's just so much charm and character in the sprites alone, and I wish more games did this type of stuff. There is a level of sameness with most of the common NPCs, but the main ones are all pretty unique. The clothing shop's run by an octopus guy, you can purchase upgrades from a mummy, and the person in charge of the game's bonus trials is a piece of candy with a drawn-on mouth. It's brilliant to say the least. I also ran into these two, who I swear are really familiar, but I just can't put my finger on where they might be from. The dialogue is also done pretty well, with most of it being text only, though a fair amount of it is spoken. As you might expect, Beebz is a motivated yet sarcastic protagonist who isn't above ribbing anyone she meets, even going as far as calling the player out upon dying. Come on! There are numerous back and forths between her and her friends, and the relationships honestly feel pretty realistic. Not ham-fisted or over-exaggerated, but how people who are friends would converse with one another. And on that note, I also really enjoyed the music. It's upbeat, energetic, and even goes as far as incorporating a bit of a cappella into the mix. Kinda reminds me of Twinsanity, though it's nowhere near as strict with its usage. It's a bit Jet Set Radio-ish, especially when you see the initial fly-through during level openings. Either way, it nails the early 3D platformer style flawlessly. So do yourself a favor and check out Demon Turf. It's a cute little experience complete with brilliant design, tight controls, and devilish charm that makes way for a true hell of a time.